The Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis has said that his government have been engaged in private discussions with the EU Commission and ECB this week, and regardless of the outcome of Sunday's referendum, there will be a deal. Last night, the IMF said Greece needed debt relief, that it should have a 20-year grace period before making any debt repayment and no final payment until 2055.
We are very keen, as a proud people, just like the Irish, to meet our obligations to our creditors. And the problem is that the combination of this gigantic debt and the austerity policies which are being imposed so as supposedly to repay it conspire to ensure that our national income shrinks at a rate which makes it impossible to repay. So a sensible fiscal policy coupled with debt relief, or we don't even need to talk about haircuts. We can have a sensible public financial engineering exercise that renders our debt payable and sustainable. This combination, together with reforms that this country badly needs, would end the crisis and help us repay our debts.
But of course, the IMF is just one of your creditors. The ECB and the European Union are two more, and they may be much harder to convince. They've certainly not mentioned debt relief. Enda Kenny said last week he would not support debt relief for Greece.
But isn't this the conundrum? Here we are negotiating as a Greek government with three institutions that disagree with one another. Each one of them has a different set of red lines. So wherever we tread on red lines. And this is, you have it. Here, you have it. This is the reason why we have not managed to reach an agreement. This is a very inefficient and ineffective way of going about the business of European economic policy. As for the Irish position on this, I don't believe that the Irish government has any reason to oppose our proposal, because let's face it, Greece and Ireland took a major hit right after the great financial collapse of 2008. On behalf of the rest of the Eurozone, the Irish people have been saddled with a preposterous debt, for reasons that you know better than I. That happened immediately after our debt exploded, and we had the extended pretend period of the bailout in 2010. It is about time the Irish and the Greeks, possibly the Portuguese and other peoples of Europe, request a very sensible debt relief exercise for the whole of Europe without haircuts. We can do it. It's technically straightforward. All we need is the political will to get together, as opposed to staying apart.
So Enda Kenny should ally himself with you in looking for debt relief?
Not just with us, with the whole of Europe. I think the whole of Europe should be sensible about that. We have a major public debt problem in Europe, and it's about time we sat around the tables rationally and we discussed it. Instead of that, we have taboos. We prohibit a discussion about debt. Debt supposedly is a moral duty, and it should not be discussed as a matter that requires any kind of rationalization, reprofiling, or restructuring. This kind of denial of very simple economic facts is contributing mightily to the deflationary forces that are making it very hard for Europe as a whole to escape from a crisis of underinvestment and the crisis of deflation.
We read this morning that the banks in Greece are fast running out of money. When will the banks reopen?
The moment there is an agreement between the Greek government and the institutions. It's very simple. The reason why the banks are closed and they're running out of money has nothing to do with the banks themselves. The banks have been adequately recapitalized. The ECB has given them a clean bill of health. This is not similar to what happened in Ireland.
But they're insolvent now.
No, they're not. So, they're not insolvent. They're illiquid.
Why then have the ECB been giving them emergency liquidity assistance?
Only because the ECB, on instructions from the Eurogroup, has asphyxiated this government from the moment it was elected for political reasons. This is a politically engineered crisis. It has nothing to do with the state of the banks. Ask the ECB. The ECB, Mario Draghi, very clearly stated until very recently last week that the Greek banks are solvent. They are adequately capitalized, but for political reasons, because of the political impasse at the level of the Eurogroup, the ECB can no longer support the Greek banks, like the central bank needs to support banks in order financing them to keep them going, until and unless we politicians get our act together and agree on what needs to be done.
You said they will reopen once there is an agreement with the creditors, but if it's a no vote, or even if it's a yes vote, but particularly if it's a no vote on Sunday, they won't be reopening on Tuesday, will they?
Oh yes, of course.
How?
Of course they will. Whether there is a yes or a no, an agreement is in the offing. If there is a yes, well, the Greek government is simply going to sign on the dotted line on the proposal of the institutions of the 25th of June. If there is a no, I can assure you that during this week of impasse, we've had some very decent proposals coming from official Europe, confidentially, and a deal is more or less done. The difference between a yes and no vote is that the yes vote is going to lead to an unsustainable, a very bad agreement for both Greece and for Europe. A no vote will lead to a better agreement. Either will lead to an agreement. And I can assure you that Mario Draghi wants nothing more than to get a green light from us politicians that an agreement has been reached before liquidity is restored.
So despite the very public pronouncements from people like Angela Merkel, from the Eurogroup leaders, from Jean-Claude Juncker, that there is no negotiations until after the referendum, are you saying you have been talking privately to the European Commission and the ECB?
Well, I did say that, didn't I? And let's not forget that in the last 3 days, we had 2 Eurogroup meetings through teleconference. So this week has not been a dead week in terms of negotiations. Negotiations have been proceeding. Let me be very clear on this. The Greek government and institutions have come very, very close when it comes to the fiscal policy as well as the list of reforms. The difference is debt relief. Now that the IMF has come on board, I'm sure that the no vote on Monday is going to create the balance which is necessary within the Eurogroup so as to agree on a sensible course of debt restructuring, debt reprofiling in a manner that seals the agreement once and for all.
But if there is a no vote, many EU leaders have said it's a vote to leave the Eurozone. We're told that relations between the Greek government and the creditors are at an all-time low. There is no trust there. So what is the basis for you saying that even if there is a no vote, you're going to return to negotiations and do a deal?
Well, of course you realise, everybody realises that, our audience realises that there's a lot of posturing prior to an agreement. A lot of noise is emitted before the agreement is signed and sealed. Greece will stay in the euro. Deposits in Greece's banks are safe, they're in euros. The creditors have chosen the strategy of playing hardball, of blackmailing our government through bank closures, but that's going to end after the referendum. The Greek people will deliver a verdict one way or the other, and the current impasse is going to end. It's really very simple. Europe knows how to snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat, and we're going to do that.
So what has all this been about then? If you're saying the end result is going to be the same, whether it's a yes vote or a no vote, why bother with a referendum at all?
But I didn't say that. I said there will be an agreement. I didn't say it will be the same agreement. The difference would be that the no vote would lead, as the IMF has said in its recent report that you mentioned, a no vote would lead to an agreement including debt relief. The negotiations have stalled because Greece's creditors refused to reduce our unpayable debt or to restructure it. That was the issue. That is the sticking point. Insisting instead that it should be repaid parametrically by the weakest members of our society, by their children and grandchildren. That is not something the Greek government could recommend to the Greek people.
But couldn't you have achieved an agreement of whatever form without having the banks closed down, without putting people in the position where they can't access their money? Businesses can't do business, they're going out of business. Why was this necessary?
This is an excellent question. Of course we could have achieved an agreement. All we had to do on the 25th of June is to accept the ultimatum that was presented to us. Then there would be no bank closures. But what would the price be of that? Let me remind you that for the last 5 years, successive Greek governments have been agreeing to such deals. They have been taking such agreements. The banks have stayed open. And what has happened to the Greek economy? Our GDP has shrunk by 27%. Unemployment has reached 30%. We have more than 35% of people below the poverty line. And the Greek debt is getting increasingly unpayable. And we can't repay the Irish, the Portuguese, the Germans, or the Slovaks. Now, did you want us to sign another such fake deal, another agreement which extends the crisis into the future, pretending that it solved it? It was not what we were voted in for.
Greece's Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis talking to me from Athens a little bit